6 months had passed since that fateful day in Texas, and Jean-Claude Van Damme couldn't shake what happened. Not the 17-second defeat. That was the easy part to accept. What haunted him were Chuck's words echoing in his mind. Martial arts isn't about proving you're better than someone else. It's about proving you're better than who you used to be. Van Damme sat in his Beverly Hills mansion, surrounded by trophies and magazine covers with his face on them. The morning sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the shrine he'd built to his own ego. Action figures of himself lined the shelves. Movie posters covered entire walls. Everything he'd worked for suddenly fell hollow. He'd spent years building an image, but that image had become a prison. The muscles, the splits, the bravado, none of it meant anything when faced with real wisdom. His phone rang constantly with offers. Directors, supplement companies, magazine editors. Everyone wanted a piece of Van Damme the brand. But he knew he had no substance beneath the surface. He had muscles and marketing, nothing more. The previous night, he'd attended another Hollywood party. Beautiful people surrounded him, laughing at his jokes, taking selfies. But when he looked in their eyes, he saw the same emptiness he felt inside. They didn't see Jean-Claude the person. They saw Van Damme the product. He'd left early, driving through the empty Los Angeles streets at 3 a.m, and for the first time in decades he'd cried. Not pretty, camera-ready tears, but ugly, soul-deep sobbing. Now, in the harsh light of morning, he stared at a business card Chuck had given him. Simple white cardstock with black text. Chucknorris Martial Arts Academy, and a phone number. Nothing flashy, nothing pretentious. He picked up the phone and dialed, his hands shaking. Chucknorris speaking. Van Damme's voice caught. "Chuck, it's Jean-Claude. I was wondering if your offer still stands." "What offer is that?" "To learn. To really learn." Van Damme paused, his pride wrestling with his desperation. "I don't know who I am anymore, Chuck. I thought I did, but that day in your dojo showed me I've been lying to myself for years. I need help." There was a pause, and Van Damme could hear children laughing in the background. Chuck's voice warmed. "My dojo opens at 6 a.m. But I should warn you, teaching children requires more discipline than any fight scene you've ever done. And Jean-Claude, leave your ego in Los Angeles. There's no room for it here." Van Damme smiled for the first time in months. A real smile. "I'll be there." "One more thing," Chuck added. "Don't bring cameras. Don't bring an entourage. And don't tell anyone you're coming. This isn't about publicity. This is about you finding yourself." Van Damme looked around his mansion, at all the symbols of success that felt like tombstones. "I have to be." 3 days later, Van Damme's rental car, a modest Toyota Camry, not a limousine, pulled up to the dojo while stars still dominated the Texas sky. The drive from Los Angeles had taken nearly 20 hours. He'd refused to fly first class, refused to make this journey comfortable. He'd driven through the night, stopping only for gas and bad coffee at truck stops where nobody recognized him. For the first time in years, he was anonymous, and it felt like breathing fresh air. Chuck was already inside at 5:30 a.m., sweeping the floor himself. The simple wooden floors gleamed in the pre-dawn light. "You're early," Chuck noted, not looking up from his work. "I didn't want to miss anything," Van Damme replied quietly. He wore a plain black GI from a sporting goods store, no designer labels, no cameras. For the first time in decades, he looked like an ordinary man. Chuck handed him a second broom. "Good. Then you can help me prepare for the morning class." For the next hour, Van Damme swept floors, arranged mats, and cleaned mirrors. His reflection stared back. Not the oiled action hero from magazine covers, but a tired man in his 40s carrying years of regret in his eyes. No one would believe that one of Hollywood's biggest action stars was doing janitor work at 5:30 in the morning. But something about the simple, honest labor felt right. "You know," Chuck said, breaking the silence, "I do this every morning, not because I can't afford a cleaning service, but because it reminds me that no task is beneath me." Van Damme paused mid-sweep. How many times had he refused to do simple things because they were beneath his status? "I've been an asshole," Van Damme said quietly. Chuck smiled. The first step toward wisdom is recognizing your foolishness. As the sun rose, painting the sky in brilliant oranges, Chuck made tea. Van Damme noticed details he'd missed before. The careful way Chuck heated the water, the respect with which he handled simple ceramic cups, the mindfulness in every gesture. "Why did you really come back, Jean-Claude?" Chuck asked. Van Damme stared into his cup. "Because I spent 20 years becoming famous, but I never became complete. You have something I don't have. Peace. Purpose. When I look in the mirror, I see a stranger. But when I watch you teach, I see something I want more than any movie role." He paused, voice cracking. "I want to know what it feels like to be proud of who I am, not just what I can do. I want to sleep without nightmares about being forgotten. I want to walk into a room and not calculate how many people recognize me. I want to just be." Chuck nodded slowly. "Then understand this. What you're asking for is harder than any training you've ever done. It means unlearning everything your ego has taught you. It means becoming a beginner again. It means failing in front of people and not making excuses." "I'm ready," Van Damme said, meeting Chuck's eyes. Chuck looked at him with penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight into his soul. The scrutiny lasted a full minute. Finally, Chuck spoke. "We'll see." The first week was humbling in ways Van Damme couldn't have imagined. He'd expected brutal physical challenges. What he got instead was something far more difficult. The complete dismantling of everything he thought he knew. Van Damme, who had trained the best choreographers in Hollywood, found himself struggling with basic kata alongside 12-year-olds. His body knew 1,000 flashy moves, perfect for cameras. But Chuck was teaching him something different. Economy of motion, efficiency, presence. "You're thinking too much," Chuck would say, stopping in mid-form. "Your body knows what to do. Your ego is getting in the way. You're trying to make every movement look impressive instead of making it effective." His frustration mounted as children half his age performed kata with natural grace, while he stumbled through like a drunk giraffe. On the third day, a 9-year-old girl named Sophie approached him after class. "Mr. Jean-Claude, can I show you something?" Van Damme knelt down. "Of course." Sophie demonstrated the kata he'd been butchering all week. Her movements flowed like water, each transition seamless, no wasted energy. Sensei Chuck says the secret is breathing. When you breathe, right, your body follows. You've been holding your breath and trying to muscle through. Van Damme felt tears threatening. Here he was, a grown man with decades of training, being taught by a child. The old Van Damme would have been humiliated. The new Van Damme smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Sophie. Will you help me practice?" During breaks, Van Damme would watch Chuck teach the children. There was something profound in the way Chuck could command respect without ever raising his voice. The kids listened because they wanted to, not because they feared him. "How do you do that?" Van Damme asked one afternoon. "Make them respect you without demanding it?" Chuck smiled. "Respect isn't taken, Jean-Claude. It's cultivated, like a garden. You can't force a flower to bloom, but you can create the conditions where blooming is natural." He paused. "These kids don't respect me because I can fight. They respect me because I see them, really see them. Not what I want them to be, but who they actually are. And then I help them become the best version of that." Van Damme absorbed this. In Hollywood, everyone wants you to be their version of you. Directors want you tougher. Producers want you more commercial. Nobody cares who you actually are inside. "Is that what you did?" Chuck asked gently. "Became what everyone else wanted?" Van Damme nodded. "I don't even remember what I wanted. I was so busy being the image that I forgot there was supposed to be a person underneath." Chuck placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then maybe that's what you're really here to learn. Not how to fight better, but how to be yourself better." One evening, after everyone had left, Van Damme was practicing forms when Chuck approached. "You're getting better, but you're still performing for the mirror for an invisible audience. Try it with your eyes closed." "But how will I know if I'm doing it right?" "You'll feel it," Chuck said simply. "Close your eyes and trust your body." Van Damme closed his eyes, feeling utterly vulnerable. He began the kata, stumbling immediately. His balance wavered. "Keep going," Chuck encouraged. Listen to your body. Slowly, something shifted. Without the mirror it performed for, his movements became less forced. His breathing deepened. He stopped trying to impress and started trying to simply be present. When he completed the form and opened his eyes, Chuck was smiling. That was the first time I've seen you truly training. Everything before was just exercise. This was practice. Do you feel the difference? Van Damme did. His body ached in new ways, but his mind felt clearer than it had in years. For 5 minutes, he hadn't worried about how he looked. Again, Chuck said, this time, remember, you're not performing. You're simply expressing the form. 3 weeks into his training, Van Damme's carefully constructed walls finally crumbled. It was a humid Thursday afternoon, and the dojo's air conditioning had broken. Everyone was sweating, tempers were short, and Van Damme could feel his patience fraying. It happened during a simple exercise. Chuck had paired him with a teenage student named James for sparring practice. The kid was good, really good, with natural timing that Van Damme recognized as genuine talent. They were supposed to be working on controlled, defensive techniques. Light contact, focus on form over power. But something snapped when James landed a particularly clean counterstrike. It wasn't hard, wasn't meant to hurt, but Van Damme's old instincts kicked in. The part of him that couldn't stand being shown up roared to life. He started showing off, executing flashy combinations that weren't part of the drill, spinning heel kicks that made James step back nervously. His movements became aggressive, competitive, turning a learning exercise into a performance designed to put a teenager in his place. The other students stopped to watch. James's expression shifted from concentration to fear. Chuck's voice cut through the dojo like a blade. Stop. Everyone froze. Chuck walked slowly to the center of the mat. Jean-Claude, what were you just doing? Van Damme's adrenaline was still pumping. I was sparring, he said defensively. No, you were performing. You were feeding your ego instead of helping your partner learn. You intimidated a student who trusts you. Chuck turned to James. Are you okay? The teenager nodded but didn't meet anyone's eyes. Do you feel like you learned anything useful? James shook his head. Chuck looked back at Van Damme, and the weight of that gaze was crushing. That's not what we do here. Something inside Van Damme snapped. Not in anger, but completely. Years of pressure, of pretending, of maintaining an impossible image. It all came flooding out. I don't know how to just be normal, he shouted, surprising everyone. His voice cracked. For 20 years, everyone has expected me to be this superhuman thing. The muscles, the kicks, the tough guy. Reporters ask me what it's like to be a martial arts master, and I smile and tell them inspiring lies because the truth is I'm just an actor who can do some fancy moves. The words poured out faster. I came to your dojo 6 months ago because I couldn't stand that you were real and I was fake. I needed to beat you to prove that movie fighting was just as valid. But you showed me the difference in 17 seconds, and it's been eating at me ever since. Van Damme gestured wildly. These kids respect you because you deserve it. People respect me because of special effects and camera angles. And just now, when that kid tagged me, all I could think was, I can't let a teenager make me look bad. How pathetic is that? The dojo fell silent. Tears started flowing. Real, ugly tears he didn't try to hide. I'm so tired, Chuck. I'm so tired of pretending. Every interview, every appearance. I'm performing, and I've done it for so long that I don't know how to stop. Chuck approached and placed both hands on his shoulders. Jean-Claude, look at me. Van Damme looked up, tears still streaming. What you just did took more courage than any fight scene you've ever filmed. That was real. Chuck turned to the class. What you just witnessed is actual bravery. It's not about fearlessness. It's about being afraid and choosing honesty anyway. That's harder than any technique I could ever teach. He looked back at Van Damme. You asked how to be normal? You start by doing exactly what you just did. Stop performing. Stop hiding. The students here don't need Jean-Claude Van Damme, the action star. They need Jean-Claude, the flawed, honest human being who's trying to become better. Van Damme wiped his face. He looked at James. I'm sorry. I was supposed to help you learn, and instead, I used you to feed my insecurity. That was wrong. James surprised everyone by approaching and offering his hand. It's okay, Sensei Jean-Claude. I do that stuff too sometimes. Get mad when someone shows me up. Maybe we can both work on it. Van Damme pulled him into a brief hug. Thank you, James. You're a better man than I was at your age. As the class dispersed, Chuck gestured for Van Damme to stay. What happened today was important. You didn't just break down. You broke through. That evening, Chuck invited Van Damme to his home for dinner. It was modest. Nothing like the mansions in Beverly Hills. Photos of family covered the walls, chronicling decades of life lived with purpose. Chuck's wife greeted them warmly, treating Van Damme not like a celebrity, but like a friend of her husband's who needed kindness. Over a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables, Chuck shared his own story. Not the movie star version, but the real one. When I came back from Vietnam, I was broken, Chuck said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of old memories. I'd seen things, done things. I was angry at the world. Martial arts saved my life, but not because it made me a better fighter. It gave me something to control when everything else was chaos. Van Damme listened intently, his food forgotten. I became obsessed with being the best. Every tournament, every demonstration. I needed to win, not for honor or discipline, but because I was terrified of being nothing. Chuck paused, looking directly at Van Damme. Sound familiar? Van Damme nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Then one day, my master told me something I'll never forget. He said, when you're fighting to prove something, you've already lost. True victory is making peace with who you are. How long did it take you? Van Damme asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chuck laughed, a genuine sound that filled the small dining room. I'm still working on it. But that's the point. It's not a destination. It's a journey. Every day, you choose who you want to be. Some days you choose well. Some days you don't. But you keep choosing. Over the next 2 months, something remarkable happened. Van Damme stopped trying to be Jean-Claude Van Damme, the action star, and started becoming just Jean-Claude, a man learning to be comfortable in his own skin. He began arriving at the dojo before dawn, not to show off, but because he genuinely enjoyed the quiet morning routine. The ritual of sweeping, preparing the space, making tea, these simple acts became his meditation. He learned the names of every student and started asking about their lives, their struggles, their victories. Not because it was good PR, but because he genuinely cared. One day, a new student arrived, a quiet kid named Marcus who had been bullied at school. He was small, skinny, and terrified of everything. The other instructors didn't know how to reach him. He flinched at loud noises and kept his eyes down during class. Van Damme watched Marcus struggle through basic exercises, seeing his own insecurity reflected back at him. The boy's hands shook when he attempted simple blocks. After class, he approached the boy carefully, kneeling down to not seem imposing. Hey, Marcus, can I show you something? The kid looked up, starstruck despite his fear. You're the guy from the movies. Forget the movies, Van Damme said gently. I want to tell you a secret. When I was your age, I was small too. Weak, scared. Kids picked on me every day. Marcus's eyes widened with disbelief. Really? Really? And you know what I learned? The strongest people are the ones who keep showing up even when they're scared. You came here today even though you were afraid. That makes you braver than most people will ever be. Something clicked in Marcus's expression. A tiny spark of hope. From that day forward, he had a shadow. Van Damme worked with him before and after class, celebrating every small victory, teaching him that strength comes from within. Chuck watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. One evening, he pulled Van Damme aside. You know what you just did for that kid? I just tried to help, Van Damme shrugged. You gave him something no movie stunt ever could. You gave him hope. You showed him that even heroes struggle. Chuck smiled. That's what real strength looks like, Jean-Claude. Word eventually spread in Hollywood that Van Damme was training at Chucknorris' dojo. Tabloids ran stories. His agent called daily, worried about his image. But Van Damme ignored it all. Then, one afternoon, trouble arrived. A young fighter, cocky, muscular, with a string of MMA victories, burst into the dojo during evening class. He was everything Van Damme used to be: arrogant, aggressive, desperate to prove himself. "I heard Chucknorris trains here," the fighter announced. "And I heard Van Damme, too. I want to challenge both of you. Show the world the old guard can't compete anymore." The students looked nervous. Van Damme felt his old instincts rising, the urge to put this punk in his place, to defend his reputation. But then he looked at Chuck, who stood calmly, no trace of anger or ego in his expression. And he looked at young Marcus, watching to see how his heroes would respond. Van Damme took a deep breath and approached the fighter. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "What does it matter?" "It matters because I want to know who you are, not what you can do." The fighter seemed confused by this response. "I'm Tyler. Tyler. I was exactly like you 6 months ago. Angry, desperate to prove I was the best." Van Damme smiled sadly. "Want to know what I learned? Being the best at fighting doesn't mean anything if you're losing at being human." "That's a cop-out," Tyler sneered. "You're just scared." Chuck finally spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Tyler, you came here for a fight. But what you actually need is what this place offers, a chance to become something more than your anger." "I don't need therapy," Tyler spat. "I need to prove I'm better than washed-up movie stars." Van Damme felt the old rage bubbling up, his hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to shut this punk up. Then he felt a small hand on his arm. Marcus was looking up at him. In the kid's eyes, Van Damme saw trust, faith, hope that his hero would choose the right path. Van Damme's fist slowly unclenched. "You know what, Tyler? You're right. You probably could beat me in a fight. My best days are behind me." He paused, letting that sink in. "But I'm okay with that, because I'm not defined by how hard I can kick anymore. I'm defined by who I choose to be every single day." He turned to Marcus and the other students. "And today, I choose to show these kids that real strength is walking away from fights that don't matter." The dojo fell silent. Tyler stood there, deflated. He'd come for violence and found something that completely disarmed him, genuine indifference to his challenge. Chuck stepped forward. "Tyler, the door's open. You can leave and keep carrying that anger, or you can stay, bow to the mat, and learn what these people have learned. Your choice." Tyler looked around at the students, at Van Damme, at Chuck. Something in his expression shifted, a crack in the armor. I don't even know how to bow properly," he admitted quietly. Chuck smiled. "Then that's where we'll start." 6 months later, Van Damme stood in front of Chuck's dojo, but this time he wasn't alone. Tyler was beside him, along with Marcus and a dozen other students. They were preparing for a demonstration. Not a flashy movie showcase, but a simple exhibition of kata and basic techniques. "Nervous?" Chuck asked, walking up beside Van Damme. "Terrified," Van Damme admitted, "but in a good way. It's been years since I cared this much about something real." "You've come a long way from a man who showed up here demanding a fight." Van Damme laughed. "That guy was an idiot." "That guy was lost," Chuck corrected gently. "There's a difference." The demonstration went beautifully. No flashy acrobatics, no dramatic showmanship, just clean, honest technique performed with heart. The audience was small, mostly families of students, but their applause was genuine. Afterward, a journalist approached Van Damme. "I heard you've been training here, preparing for a comeback film." Van Damme smiled. "No comeback. I'm exactly where I need to be. But your career is less important than being a good teacher, a good mentor, a good person." He glanced at Chuck, who nodded approvingly. "I spent 20 years building a career. Now I'm spending my time building a life. There's a difference." Years would pass. Van Damme would eventually return to Hollywood, but as a different person. His performances carried a weight they never had before, genuine humanity behind the action hero facade. He'd talk openly about his struggles, his journey, his redemption. But every few months, he'd return to Texas, return to the small dojo where he'd learned the most important lesson of his life. And every time he visited, Chuck would have tea ready. You know, Van Damme said during one of these visits, "I came here thinking you'd teach me to fight better. Instead, you taught me to live better." Chuck poured the tea with practiced grace. Sometimes the greatest victories happen when we stop fighting altogether. They sat in comfortable silence. Two warriors who had learned that true strength isn't about dominance or power. It's about wisdom, compassion, and the courage to become better than who you used to be. Marcus, now a brown belt and teaching younger students himself, joined them. Tyler, fully reformed and working towards black belt, was right behind him. Sensei Van Damme. Marcus asked, "Why you keep coming back here? You could train anywhere in the world." Van Damme looked at Chuck, then at the young faces full of genuine curiosity. "Because this is where I learned the most important fight of all, the one against my own ego. And that's a fight you never stop training for." Chuck raised his teacup in a quiet toast. "To the journey that never ends. To becoming who we're meant to be," Van Damme added. And in that small dojo in Texas, surrounded by students who saw them not as celebrities, but as teachers, two legends found something more valuable than any trophy or title: peace, purpose, and the knowledge that the greatest victories are the ones no camera will ever capture. Because real strength doesn't need an audience. It just needs courage, humility, and the willingness to keep learning. Even when the whole world thinks you already know everything, the warrior's journey never truly ends. It simply evolves. And sometimes the greatest battles we face aren't against opponents in front of us, but against the person we used to be. Van Damme had finally won the fight that mattered most. He defeated himself. The greatest victory is the one that requires no battle. Ancient wisdom, often repeated by both Chucknorris and Claude Van Damme to their students, reminding them that true mastery is about transformation, not domination.